Dr. Eleanor Winters stared at the photograph under the magnifying glass, her breath catching in her throat. The restoration lab at Boston's Historical Society was silent except for the gentle hum of the dehumidifier. Rain pelted against the windows of the century-old building, casting rippling shadows across the examination table. "This can't be right," she whispered to herself, adjusting her glasses. The daguerreotype from 1859 showed the Pembroke family, father, mother, and their 4 children, arranged in formal poses, as was customary for the period. Eleanor had been working on this restoration for weeks, carefully removing the tarnish and damage of time. Now that the image was clear, she noticed something impossible. Each child's shadow fell in the wrong direction. While the parents' shadows stretched naturally behind them from the photographer's light source, the children's shadows pointed toward the light, defying the laws of physics. Eleanor checked her notes. The photograph hadn't been manipulated or double-exposed according to the preliminary analysis. "Dr. Mitchell needs to see this," she muttered, reaching for her phone. Her colleague Samuel Mitchell was the department's expert on historical photography techniques. His office was just down the hall, but Eleanor preferred documentation before discussion. She snapped several digital photos of the anomaly. As she examined the digital images on her screen, a chill ran through her body. The children's faces, previously obscured by age and damage, now seemed different. Their expressions weren't the typical serious poses of Victorian photography. They appeared afraid. Eleanor's phone buzzed, a text from the archive's director requesting an update on the restoration. She hesitated before responding. "Made significant progress. Found unusual anomalies. Meeting with Dr. Mitchell tomorrow." As she placed the daguerreotype in its protective case, Eleanor noticed something she'd overlooked. Penciled on the back in faded script was a note. "The Pembroke children. Photographed 3 days after the incident." La. What incident? Eleanor wondered, making a note to check the family's history. Before leaving for the night, she searched the digital archives for information on the Pembroke family. Their estate had stood in Beacon Hill, a property passed down for generations until it was demolished in 1923. The last descendant had died childless in a psychiatric institution. Eleanor shivered as she gathered her belongings. The rain had intensified and darkness had fallen over Boston. As she passed the secured case containing the photograph, she could have sworn she heard a child's whisper from within. Probably just the old building settling, she told herself, pulling her coat tighter. But as she turned off the lights, the darkness seemed to gather more densely around the case holding the Pembroke family portrait. Eleanor arrived at the Historical Society early the next morning, dark circles under her eyes betraying her restless night. Dreams of children with backward shadows had plagued her sleep. Samuel Mitchell was already waiting in the lab, his lanky frame hunched over a cup of coffee. At 62, he was the department's most respected scholar on 19th century photography. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he commented, as Eleanor placed her bag down. "Maybe I have," she replied, retrieving the protective case. "Take a look at this." Samuel's professional demeanor dissolved into bewilderment as he examined the photograph. "This isn't possible," he muttered, switching between different magnifying glasses. "That's what I thought," Eleanor said. "And there's more." She showed him her overnight research. The Pembroke family had been prominent in Boston society until a series of tragedies. The father, William Pembroke, was a successful merchant. His wife, Catherine, was known for her charity work. Their 4 children, Thomas, Mary, Edward, and little Rose, were the subject of newspaper articles about a mysterious incident in 1859, the same year as the photograph. "The archives mention a fire at their summer home," Eleanor explained. All 4 children were trapped inside, but somehow escaped unharmed. Witnesses claimed they saw the children outside watching the fire, but William insisted they were rescued from inside. "Were there any other photographs of the family?" Samuel asked, still studying the daguerreotype. "None that I could find. This seems to be the only surviving image taken 3 days after the fire. Samuel frowned. In 1859, photography was still relatively uncommon. Having a family portrait taken after a traumatic event is unusual. They spent the morning examining the photograph using every technique available. X-ray analysis confirmed no tampering or double exposure. The shadows were original to the image. "We need to know more about the photographer," Samuel suggested. "The name on the case is Thaddeus Gray. I've never heard of him." Eleanor searched the archives but found little information. Gray had a studio on Tremont Street for only 6 months in 1859. After the Pembroke photograph, he abruptly closed his business and disappeared from Boston records. Late in the afternoon, Eleanor discovered a newspaper clipping from 1860. Thaddeus Gray had been found dead in his new studio in New York. The article described his death as a tragic incident of self-violence following reports of the gentleman suffering hallucinations. More disturbing was a sentence near the end. Mr. Gray was reportedly haunted by his final Boston commission, repeatedly claiming the subjects of a family portrait were not as they appeared. Eleanor's hands trembled as she showed Samuel the article. "We should speak with Dr. Abernathy at Harvard," Samuel said quietly. "She's done extensive research on supposed supernatural elements in early photography." As they carefully returned the photograph to its case, Eleanor noticed something that made her blood run cold. The children's expressions seemed to have changed, their eyes now looking directly at her, their mouths curved in slight smiles. "Samuel," she whispered, "does something look different to you?" Before he could answer, the lights in the lab flickered, and for a brief moment, Eleanor thought she saw small shadows moving along the wall, in the wrong direction. Dr. Vivian Abernathy's office at Harvard's Department of Folklore and Mythology was exactly what Eleanor had expected. Crowded bookshelves, artifacts from various cultures, and the subtle scent of old paper and tea. The professor herself, however, defied expectations. Rather than the eccentric academic Eleanor had imagined, Vivian was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a pragmatic demeanor and a reputation for debunking supernatural claims through historical research. "Shadow anomalies in daguerreotypes aren't uncommon," Dr. Abernathy explained after examining their digital copies. "Early photography had numerous technical limitations. What makes this case interesting is the precision of the incongruity." "So, you don't think it's unusual?" Samuel asked. "I didn't say that." Vivian leaned back in her chair. "The Pembroke case has been on my radar for years, but I've never seen the actual photograph. The family history is significant." She retrieved a leather-bound journal from her shelf. "This is the diary of Dr. Henry Sullivan, the Pembroke family physician. I acquired it at an estate sale years ago." Eleanor carefully opened the fragile journal to the bookmarked page, dated June 12, 1859, 5 days before the fire. "I fear for the Pembroke children," the entry read. "They have not been themselves since their fever last month. Catherine insists they are recovered, but something in their eyes suggests otherwise. They speak in unison occasionally, which she attributes to childish games. William confided that he found them standing in the garden at midnight, staring at the moon. When questioned, they claimed they were practicing being in our bodies." Eleanor's skin prickled as she continued reading. The next entry described the children's strange behavior intensifying, speaking in languages they couldn't possibly know, drawing unusual symbols, and frightening the household staff. The final entry, dated June 16th, the day before the fire, was the most disturbing. "William summoned me in distress. He claims to have seen all 4 children in the library, yet simultaneously heard them playing upstairs. When he confronted Catherine, she broke down, admitting she too has witnessed impossible occurrences. I have recommended they take the children to their summer home for fresh air. Perhaps distance from whatever influence affects them in Boston will help." Dr. Abernathy took the journal back. "The fire happened the next day. Sullivan later documented his suspicions that William may have started it deliberately, believing something had taken residence in his children. "Are you suggesting some form of possession?" Samuel asked skeptically. "I'm an academic, Dr. Mitchell. I suggest nothing supernatural." Vivian's tone was measured. "But historical records show the Pembroke summer home was built on land purchased from a Wampanoag family who warned against disturbing certain areas of the property. William ignored these warnings during construction." She handed them a folder containing copies of land deeds and correspondence. "What interests me about your photograph is the timing, 3 days after the fire. If the children survived, why would a father who potentially tried to harm them commission a family portrait?" Eleanor felt a chill. What if he wanted proof they were really his children? Or proof they weren't? Dr. Abernathy replied quietly. As they prepared to leave, Vivian offered one final piece of information. The Pembroke estate in Beacon Hill remained in the family until 1923, but was uninhabited after 1860. William and Catherine moved to Europe, leaving the children in the care of relatives. All 4 died before reaching adulthood, unusual even for that era. "And the relatives who cared for them?" Eleanor asked. "All committed to asylums within a decade," Vivian replied. "Each diagnosed with the same delusion, that the Pembroke children they raised were imposters with shadows that moved independently." Outside, the October wind scattered leaves across Harvard Yard as Eleanor and Samuel walked in silence, each processing what they'd learned. "We should stop this research," Samuel finally said. "Return the photograph to storage and move on to other projects." Eleanor nodded in agreement, but knew neither of them would. The mystery had taken hold, and the Pembroke children, or whatever they were, had found new observers after more than a century and a half. That night, Eleanor dreamed of children playing in her apartment, children whose shadows moved when they stood still. She awoke at 3:17 a.m., her bedroom unusually cold despite the heating system's steady hum. Unable to return to sleep, she opened her laptop and began cataloguing what they knew about the Pembroke family. The original address of their Beacon Hill home was listed in the property records, 47 Acorn Street. Eleanor froze. Acorn Street was just a few blocks from her apartment, one of Boston's most photographed historic lanes with its cobblestones and brick row houses. She'd walked past number 47 countless times, admiring its preserved federal-style architecture. The current building, according to records, had been constructed in 1925, 2 years after the original Pembroke home was demolished. But the property itself was the same plot of land where the family had lived. Despite the early hour and her better judgment, Eleanor found herself dressing warmly. 20 minutes later, she stood on the deserted cobblestone street, looking up at the darkened windows of 47 Acorn. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to herself, breath fogging in the autumn chill. The street lamps cast multiple shadows around her feet, all behaving as they should, stretching away from the light sources. The building before her was just a building, currently divided into luxury condominiums, according to the discreet sign beside the entrance. As she turned to leave, movement in an upper window caught her attention. A small hand pressed against the glass, then withdrew quickly. Eleanor's heart raced as she checked the window again, but saw only darkness. She pulled out her phone to text Samuel, but stopped when she noticed a figure at the end of the narrow street, a child-sized silhouette standing perfectly still. When Eleanor blinked, it was gone. "I'm sleep-deprived and suggestible," she muttered, hurrying back toward the main road where she could find a taxi. As she walked, Eleanor became increasingly certain she was being followed. She glanced back repeatedly, seeing nothing, yet the sensation persisted. Reaching Charles Street, she finally found a taxi and returned home, double-locking her door before collapsing into bed. Morning brought clarity and embarrassment. Eleanor chided herself for the midnight excursion as she prepared for work. The photograph was affecting her more than she cared to admit, a professional hazard when working with historical artifacts connected to tragic events. At the Historical Society, she found Samuel examining the daguerreotype with new equipment borrowed from the Conservation Department. "I need to show you something," he said without greeting. The spectral analysis revealed text hidden in the background of the image. On his computer screen was an enhanced version of the photograph. Behind the Pembroke family, barely visible in the original, were words scratched into the backdrop. "Not them." "This was intentional," Samuel explained. Gray must have etched it into the backdrop, knowing it would be nearly invisible in the final image. He was trying to leave a message. Eleanor told him about her visit to Acorn Street, expecting skepticism, but Samuel's expression remained troubled. "I had a visitor last night," he confessed. "I woke up around 3 a.m. and found wet footprints in my hallway, small, like a child's. They led from my front door to the office, where I'd left my copies of the photograph research, then disappeared." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "My apartment was locked, Eleanor, all windows closed, and when I checked my security camera, there was nothing, but the footprints were real. I touched them." Eleanor felt her professional detachment crumbling. "What's happening, Samuel?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we need to return to Acorn Street, properly, during daylight, with recording equipment. If the Pembroke mystery is more than historical, we need documentation." As they spoke, Eleanor noticed something that made her voice catch. The photograph, secured in its protective case on the table between them, had changed again. Now all 6 Pembroke family members were looking directly at the camera, and all 6, including the parents, had shadows pointing in the wrong direction. Autumn sunlight softened the brick facades of Acorn Street as Eleanor and Samuel approached number 47 that afternoon. The historic lane was busy with tourists photographing its picturesque cobblestones, a stark contrast to Eleanor's eerie midnight visit. "What exactly are we looking for?" Samuel asked, adjusting the small digital camera hanging around his neck. "I'm not sure," Eleanor admitted. "Historical inconsistencies, architectural anomalies, anything connecting the current building to the original Pembroke home." They had contacted the property manager, explaining they were researching the street's architectural history. A representative named Diane Walsh had agreed to meet them, intrigued by the Historical Society's interest. Diane was waiting at the entrance, a professional smile on her face. "Welcome to the Acorn Residences," she greeted them. "This building has quite a history, though it's not one of Beacon Hill's original structures." As she led them through the elegant lobby, Diane explained the building's background. The current structure was designed by Edmund Lawrence in 1925. Before that, the property belonged to a single family for generations, though their home was demolished after standing vacant for decades. "The Pembrokes," Eleanor said. Diane looked surprised. "Yes, exactly. History buffs, I see." The tour continued through common areas decorated with historic photographs of Beacon Hill. Eleanor noticed none showed the original Pembroke house. "The foundation of the current building incorporates elements from the previous structure," Diane explained as they descended to the basement level. Lawrence was known for recycling architectural features, particularly foundation stones, more sustainable even back then. The basement housed storage units for residents and mechanical systems. The walls were a combination of modern concrete and much older stonework, dark granite blocks with subtle carvings around their edges. "These are original to the Pembroke home," Diane confirmed, running her hand along the ancient stones. "The symbols are interesting, supposedly protective marks, common in colonial-era Boston." Samuel photographed the symbols while Eleanor examined them closely. They weren't the typical protective markings found in colonial architecture. These were older, more complex patterns that reminded her of Wampanoag designs mentioned in Dr. Abernathy's research. "Has anyone reported anything unusual about the building?" Eleanor asked carefully. Diane's professional demeanor wavered slightly. "What do you mean?" "Cold spots, electrical irregularities, areas that make residents uncomfortable." The property manager hesitated. The fourth floor has had some tenant turnover. Unit 4C in particular, beautiful space, but we've had trouble keeping occupants long-term. Probably just the old pipes making noise. As they returned upstairs, Eleanor asked if they could see the courtyard behind the building. The original Pembroke home had gardens extending to the next street, she explained. We're curious how the current property utilizes that space. The courtyard was small but elegantly landscaped, with a central fountain surrounded by carefully maintained plantings. A massive oak tree dominated one corner, its thick trunk and spreading branches suggesting considerable age. "That tree looks older than the building," Samuel commented. "It is," Diane confirmed. "The architect designed the courtyard around it. Apparently, the Pembroke children used to play beneath it." She checked her watch. "I have another appointment, but feel free to take photos out here. Just come back through the lobby when you're finished." Once alone, Eleanor approached the ancient oak. Its gnarled trunk was scored with old carvings, initials, dates and symbols, partially obscured by the tree's growth over decades. "Samuel, look at this," she called, pointing to 4 sets of initials carved at a child's height. TP, MP, EP, and RP. Thomas, Mary, Edward, and Rose Pembroke. Below the initials was a crude drawing of 4 stick figures. Unlike typical children's drawings, these figures had triangular heads and elongated limbs. Most disturbing were the lines extending from their feet, shadows pointing toward the sun, scratched above them. "They knew," Eleanor whispered. Even before the photograph, they knew something was wrong with their shadows. A sudden gust of wind sent leaves swirling around them, and the fountain water momentarily sprayed in the wrong direction, against the wind. Samuel's camera clicked rapidly, documenting everything. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor noticed a basement window, well partly hidden by shrubbery. Through the dirty glass, she could see directly into a section of the old foundation they hadn't visited, a small room with the original stone floor intact. 4 small handprints were pressed into the centuries-old concrete, surrounded by symbols matching those on the foundation stones. Before she could show Samuel, Eleanor's phone rang, Dr. Abernathy calling with unexpected news. "I found Thaddeus Gray's journal," the professor said without preamble. "It was misfiled in Harvard's collection under photographic technical manuals. Eleanor, you need to see this immediately. He wrote about the Pembroke photograph on the day he took it." As they left Acorn Street, Eleanor felt eyes watching from the building's windows. When she looked back, she saw only reflections in the glass, and 4 small shadows moving independently across the courtyard, though nothing cast them. Dr. Abernathy's office seemed darker than during their previous visit, despite the afternoon sunlight filtering through the windows. The professor had cleared her desk except for a slim, leather-bound volume. "This is Gray's technical journal," she explained, as Eleanor and Samuel took seats. "Most entries are about chemical formulations and exposure techniques, but the entries from June 1859 document his experience with the Pembrokes." Eleanor carefully opened the journal to the marked page. The handwriting was tight and precise, though it became increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. June 20th, 1859. Received commission from W. Pembroke of Acorn Street for family portrait. Unusual circumstances. Requested urgency following recent fire at their summer residence. Offered substantial payment for immediate service. Will bring portable equipment to their home tomorrow, as Mrs. P. apparently cannot bear to leave the children. June 21st, 1859. Something extraordinary occurred during the Pembroke sitting. The apparatus functioned normally. Chemistry was standard mixture. Family arranged conventionally. Parents seated, 4 children standing. The children were uncommonly still, requiring no head braces. Exposure completed without incident. However, upon developing the plate, I observed an optical anomaly regarding the shadows. Have set another appointment for tomorrow to retake the portrait. June 22nd, 1859. Second attempt with Pembroke family. Adjusted lighting, positioned reflectors differently. Children again preternaturally cooperative. Mr. P seemed agitated, asking repeatedly if I noticed anything unusual. Developing the plate revealed identical shadow anomaly. Cannot explain this scientifically. Most disturbing, when I mentioned the shadow irregularity to Mr. P privately, he turned white and whispered, "Then you see it too." He paid triple my fee and took the daguerreotype, though clearly distressed by the image. He mentioned returning to Europe now that I have proof. Upon cleaning my equipment this evening, discovered strange residue on the lens cloth. Under magnification, appears to be 4 perfect miniature handprints, too small even for their youngest child. The final entry, dated June 23rd, was written in a shaky hand that trailed off the page. "Children outside my window tonight. Recognize them as the Pembroke children, though I've been told the family departed for the harbour this morning. They stood motionless in the street for hours, shadows stretching toward my light though there was no moon. When I approached the window, they smiled in unison. Their teeth, wrong shape, too many. Am closing Boston studio immediately. New York position awaits. Must leave this place. They know I saw..." The entry ended abruptly. The remainder of the journal contained no further mention of the Pembrokes, though the writing became increasingly incoherent until the final pages, which contained only repetitive sketches of elongated figures with triangular heads. "Gray was found dead 7 months later," Dr. Abernathy said quietly. "Official cause was suicide, but the police report noted unusual circumstances. His body was discovered surrounded by his photographic chemicals, yet the autopsy found no evidence of poisoning. Most strange was the report that his shadow appeared detached from the corpse, according to the officer who discovered him." Eleanor shared what they'd found at the Acorn Street building, the ancient oak with the children's carvings and the handprints in the foundation. "The Wampanoag warnings about the land make more sense now," Dr. Abernathy said. "Several New England tribes had legends about shadow beings, entities that could take human form but cast shadows that revealed their true nature." "Ah, you can't seriously suggest," Samuel began. "I'm not suggesting anything supernatural," the professor interrupted. "I'm contextualizing historical accounts within their cultural framework. What happened to the Pembroke family was documented across multiple sources. Whether we interpret those events through a modern psychological lens or a 19th century spiritual one is up to us." Eleanor removed the digital copy of the photograph from her bag. "The image has changed again," she said, displaying her tablet. The daguerreotype now showed only the parents, looking terrified. Where the 4 children had stood, there were only dark, elongated silhouettes with triangular heads. "That's impossible," Samuel whispered. "Digital files don't change spontaneously." "Check the original," Dr. Abernathy suggested. Eleanor hesitated. "It's secured in the conservation vault at the Historical Society." "Are you certain?" the professor asked. "Because I received this 20 minutes ago." She turned her computer monitor toward them. On the screen was an email from the Historical Society's security system. "Motion detected in Restoration Lab B at 2:17 p.m. View attached video." The grainy security footage showed the lab where Eleanor had been working on the photograph. The protective case sat on the examination table, seemingly undisturbed until the lid suddenly opened by itself. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then 4 small, dark shapes moved across the floor toward the case. The video abruptly ended. "The security guard found this when he checked the lab," Dr. Abernathy said, handing Eleanor a note written on Historical Society letterhead. In childish handwriting were the words, "We want to play. Come back to our tree." Rain lashed against the windows of the coffee shop, where Eleanor, Samuel, and Dr. Abernathy had retreated to discuss their next steps. The Historical Society had been evacuated due to an environmental systems failure, Every light in the building had simultaneously shattered at 3:17 p.m. "We need to approach this rationally," Samuel insisted, though his shaking hands betrayed his composure. "There must be a scientific explanation." "Science can't explain everything, Dr. Mitchell," Abernathy replied. "History is full of documented phenomena that defied contemporary understanding." Eleanor stared into her untouched coffee. "The photograph is missing. Security confirmed it's not in the vault or the lab." "Do you think someone took it?" Samuel asked. "The security footage showed no one entering or leaving," Eleanor said. "Just those shapes approaching the case." Dr. Abernathy leaned forward. "I've been researching similar cases throughout New England's history. The Pembroke incident isn't unique. There are at least 7 documented cases of families in Massachusetts between 1700 and 1920 reporting children with shadow anomalies following construction on certain properties." "What happened in those cases?" Eleanor asked. "Various outcomes. Some families abandoned their homes. Others performed rituals based on Native American practices to bind whatever had attached to their children. A few cases ended in tragedy, family members taking drastic actions out of fear or desperation. Like William Pembroke starting the fire," Samuel murmured. "Precisely." Abernathy opened her laptop. "I found William's private letters in a collection donated to Harvard by a Pembroke cousin. After fleeing to Europe, he wrote to his brother confessing what happened." She read from the screen. "The children who emerged from the fire were not our children. Catherine refuses to acknowledge this truth, though she must sense it. They move and speak as Thomas, Mary, Edward, and Rose, yet they are hollow imitations. I have seen them at night, standing motionless in the garden, their shadows stretching toward the house though the moon is behind them. The photographer saw it too, the proof I needed before we depart. Whatever dwells within them is ancient and patient. It does not need to rush, for it has claimed them completely." Thunder crashed outside, momentarily plunging the coffee shop into darkness. When the lights returned, Eleanor noticed a small puddle of water on the floor beside their table. A child's footprint, though no child had passed by. "They're following us," she whispered. "Or we're experiencing mass suggestion triggered by historical research," Samuel countered, though without conviction. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The tree remembers. The stones remember. We remember you, Eleanor." She dropped the phone as if burned. "How do they know my name? How did they get my number?" "What do they want?" Samuel asked quietly. Dr. Abernathy closed her laptop. "Based on the patterns in similar historical cases, they want acknowledgement, recognition, maybe completion of whatever was interrupted in 1859. The binding ritual," Eleanor realized. "The handprints in the foundation. They were part of a containment effort. The Wampanoag warnings, the symbols on the stones. Someone tried to bind whatever entities were on that land to the foundation of the house. And when the original house was demolished in 1923, Samuel began. The binding weakened," Abernathy finished. "The new construction incorporated the old foundation stones, but probably disrupted the original pattern." Eleanor stood suddenly. "We need to go back to Acorn Street. Now." "That's exactly what they want," Samuel protested. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, "and I think we need to find out why." Outside, the storm had intensified. The 3 researchers huddled under shared umbrellas as they made their way back to Beacon Hill. The historic streets were deserted, sensible Bostonians having sought shelter from the deluge. As they approached Acorn Street, Eleanor noticed 4 small figures standing beneath the ancient oak tree, visible beyond the building. They remained motionless, despite the driving rain. "Do you see them?" she asked. The others nodded silently. The front door of 47 Acorn Street stood open, though no lights were visible inside. As they hesitated on the sidewalk, a child's laugh carried through the storm, a sound devoid of warmth or mirth. "We have a choice," Eleanor said. "We can walk away, pretend this never happened, return to our rational academic lives." "They'll follow us," Abernathy said with certainty. Historical accounts suggest these entities don't simply disappear once noticed. They persist, growing stronger with attention. Then we face them, Eleanor decided. We document everything scientifically. We find the truth behind the Pembroke mystery, whatever it is. Samuel looked between the two women, then sighed heavily. History remembers the brave researchers, I suppose. As they stepped toward the open door, the four figures beneath the oak tree moved for the first time, turning in perfect unison to watch the approaching academics, their shadows stretching impossibly toward the building against the flow of rain. The lobby of 47 Acorn Street was dark and silent, illuminated only by occasional flashes of lightning through the windows. No security guard occupied the desk. No residents passed through the elegant space. "Power's out," Samuel observed unnecessarily, switching on his phone's flashlight. Eleanor felt drawn toward the stairwell rather than the elevator. "We need to go to the courtyard," she said, her voice echoing in the empty building. "The handprints in the foundation first," Dr. Abernathy suggested. "If this is connected to a binding ritual, we should understand what we're dealing with before confronting whatever is in the courtyard." They descended to the basement, flashlight beams dancing across the ancient stonework. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step downward. Eleanor's breath fogged in the air as they reached the bottom. "This way," she said, leading them toward the storage area where she'd glimpsed the room with the handprints. The door was unlocked, swinging open at her touch to reveal a small chamber that appeared much older than the surrounding basement. The floor was rough-hewn stone, and the walls were earth-reinforced with timbers that had turned black with age. In the center of the floor were four small handprints pressed into what had once been wet concrete, now hardened for over a century and a half. Surrounding the prints was a circle of symbols, matching those carved on the foundation stones. Dr. Abernathy knelt beside the markings, careful not to touch them. "These are containment symbols," she confirmed, "similar to those documented in Wampanoag protective rituals, but with modifications I associate with European folk magic. A hybrid approach." "Look at this!" Samuel called from the corner of the room. His flashlight illuminated a small wooden box embedded in the wall. The box was sealed with wax and bound with copper wire green with verdigris. Carved into the top was a familiar pattern, 4 elongated figures with triangular heads. "Don't touch it," Dr. Abernathy warned. "If this is part of the binding, disturbing it could—" The building shuddered as thunder crashed directly overhead. Dust filtered down from the ancient timbers. "We need to see what's happening in the courtyard," Eleanor said, a sense of urgency growing within her. They hurried back upstairs and through the lobby toward the rear of the building. The door to the courtyard was ajar, rain blowing in through the opening. Through the gap, Eleanor could see the massive oak tree thrashing in the wind, its branches seeming to reach toward the building. As they stepped outside, the rain suddenly stopped, though clouds still boiled overhead. The courtyard was eerily silent, the fountain still, the recently manicured plantings now overgrown, as if neglected for years. Beneath the oak tree stood 4 children in Victorian clothing, 3 boys and a girl, arranged exactly as in the daguerreotype. Their faces were unnaturally pale, their eyes reflecting the researchers' flashlight beams like those of nocturnal animals. "Thomas, Mary, Edward and Rose Pembroke," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The children smiled in unison, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous and sharply pointed. "Not Pembroke," they replied in perfect synchronization, their voices overlapping in a discordant chorus. "Never Pembroke." Samuel's flashlight flickered and died. Dr. Abernathy's followed suit, leaving only Eleanor's phone providing a dim glow in the unnatural darkness. "What are you?" she asked. The children took a single step forward, moving with fluid grace that seemed both childlike and ancient. Their shadows stretched toward the researchers, though Eleanor's light was behind them. "We are the waiting ones," they answered together. "We were here before the stone houses, before the wooden houses, before houses. What do you want?" Samuel's voice trembled slightly. The smallest child, Rose or whatever wore her form, tilted her head at an impossible angle. To play, to be, to walk, for so long we were bound to the deep places. Then the digging man broke the old stones. We found the empty ones, the fever children with weak shadows. The Pembroke children had been ill, Dr. Abernathy whispered to Eleanor. The fever must have weakened them somehow, made them vulnerable. We wore them. The children continued, still speaking as one. But the Fire Father knew. He tried to burn us back to the deep places. The binding woman came after, with copper and stone and blood. Eleanor's phone screen showed a new text message from an unknown number. The photograph was our proof, our warning, our call to those who would see. She looked up from the screen to find the children standing much closer, though she hadn't seen them move. Their shadows now encircled the three researchers like a dark moat. "You restored our faces," the tallest boy said, his voice suddenly individual and childlike. "You gave us strength with your attention. You brought us back into the light," the girl added, reaching toward Eleanor with a pale hand. Dr. Abernathy stepped between them. "The binding ritual was performed by someone who understood what you are. We can strengthen it, send you back to the deep places." The children's faces contorted with rage, features shifting momentarily to reveal something ancient and inhuman beneath the childlike masks. Their shadows rose from the ground, becoming three-dimensional forms that towered over their physical bodies. "Too late," they hissed in unison. "The box is failing. The copper is thin." "The old magic weakens with each storm," the children continued, their voices now carrying an undercurrent that seemed to vibrate through the earth beneath them. "Soon we will walk freely again, as we did before the binding woman came." Eleanor felt her phone grow hot in her hand. The screen flickered, displaying an image of the missing daguerreotype. As she watched, the photograph changed again, the children's faces elongating, becoming less human with each pulse of light. "Who was the binding woman?" Dr. Abernathy asked, her academic instincts persisting even in the face of impossibility. The smallest child, the thing wearing Rose Pembroke's form, smiled. The mother who was not fooled. She knew her children burned, but saw us wearing their remains. She sought the old knowledge, the deep words, the earth magic. Catherine Pembroke, Eleanor realized. The historical record said she stayed in Boston while William took the other children to Europe. "She didn't go with them because she knew they weren't her children," Samuel whispered. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the courtyard in harsh white light. For a brief moment, Eleanor saw the children as they truly were. Not human forms at all, but ancient, spindly creatures, with elongated limbs and triangular heads, exactly like the drawings carved into the oak tree and the wooden box. "She bound us to the foundation stones," the creatures said, their voices dropping to a guttural tone that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Trapped us in the deep dark. But houses fall, stones crack, magic fades, and we remember." The ground beneath the courtyard trembled. Cracks appeared in the paving stones, dark liquid seeping upward like blood from a wound. Dr. Abernathy grabbed Eleanor's arm. "The box in the basement. It must be the focus of Catherine's binding spell. If it's failing, we need to reinforce it," Eleanor concluded. "How?" Samuel demanded. "We're historians, not occultists." The tallest creature stepped forward, its movements now less human, more like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. "You cannot bind us again. We have waited too long, fed too well on fear and memory. The children you seek to protect are long gone." Eleanor's mind raced through everything they'd learned. "The copper," she said suddenly. "The box was bound with copper wire. Dr. Abernathy, didn't you mention copper as a common element in Wampanoag binding rituals?" The professor nodded. "Copper was considered a bridge between worlds. We have no copper," Samuel interrupted. Eleanor felt her pocket. "Yes, we do." She pulled out several pennies. "These are copper-plated, maybe enough to strengthen the binding temporarily." The creatures hissed, their shadows writhing like living things. "You understand nothing of the old ways. Your metal trinkets are weak, diluted by time and progress." But Eleanor saw fear in their reaction. "We need to get to the basement," she told her colleagues. "Now." As they turned toward the building, the four creatures moved with impossible speed, blocking their path. The oak tree's branches reached down like grasping hands, roots breaking through the courtyard stones. "You will stay," the creatures commanded. "You will witness our return. You will be the first to feed us in the new age." Eleanor felt a chill pass through her body, a cold so profound it seemed to reach her very core. The smallest creature extended a hand toward her, and she felt her muscles seize, her body no longer responding to her will. Samuel and Dr. Abernathy appeared similarly frozen, their expressions locked in terror. "Your shadows are strong," the creature wearing Rose's form said, its voice now a rasping whisper. "But ours are stronger." Eleanor watched helplessly as her own shadow began to detach from her feet, stretching toward the creatures as if being pulled away. She felt a profound emptiness growing within her, as if something essential was being extracted. Through sheer force of will, she managed to move her fingers, still clutching the pennies. As her shadow continued to separate from her body, she focused on the coins, recalling Dr. Abernathy's words about copper being a bridge between worlds. With every ounce of strength remaining, Eleanor flipped one of the pennies into the air. It caught the dim light, spinning copper and zinc in a brief arc before landing at the feet of the tallest creature. The effect was immediate and shocking. Where the penny touched the ground, a pulse of blue-white light erupted. The creature shrieked, a sound no human child could produce, as its shadow recoiled from the copper. The momentary disruption broke whatever force held Eleanor immobile. She staggered backward, her shadow snapping back to her like an elastic band. "The copper disrupts them," she shouted to her colleagues. "Get to the basement." Samuel recovered next. Pulling Dr. Abernathy toward the building, Eleanor flung the remaining pennies at the creatures, each coin creating a flash of energy that pushed the beings back. They raced through the lobby and down the stairs, the inhuman shrieks of the creatures echoing behind them. The basement was darker than before, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something older, more primal. They found the room with the handprints, now illuminated by a faint blue glow emanating from the wooden box in the wall. The box was visibly deteriorating, hairline cracks spreading across its surface, the copper binding wire thinned to threads. "What do we do?" Samuel asked, his academic skepticism now completely abandoned. Dr. Abernathy examined the failing container. "We need to strengthen the binding. The original ritual used copper, blood, and intent. We have pennies for copper, but will this work?" Eleanor removed her silver necklace with its small copper pendant, a replica of an ancient Wampanoag design she'd purchased at a museum gift shop years ago. The professor's eyes widened. "That's remarkably appropriate." "Yes." A crash from upstairs indicated the creatures had entered the building. The temperature in the basement plummeted, frost forming on the ancient stones. Working quickly, Dr. Abernathy wrapped Eleanor's copper pendant around the failing wire on the box, weaving it through the corroded strands. "We need a personal connection," she explained. "Something freely given that connects us to this place and time." Samuel removed his Harvard-class ring. "This has my initials and blood. I cut myself when I first wore it." They added the ring to the binding. Eleanor hesitated, then removed the small flash drive from her pocket, containing all her research on the Pembroke family. "My connection to this story," she said, placing it against the box. The creature's presence grew closer, the air in the basement becoming thick and difficult to breathe. Shadow tendrils slipped under the door, probing the room like searching fingers. "We need words," Dr. Abernathy said urgently. "Intent expressed through language." Catherine would have used a combination of Wampanoag phrases and English declarations. "I don't know any Wampanoag," Samuel protested. "English will suffice if our intent is clear," the professor replied. "Speak from your core being." Command them back to the deep places." As shadow tendrils encircled their feet, the three researchers joined hands around the wooden box, forming a human circuit with the copper at its center. "We see you," Eleanor began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We know you. We bind you to the deep places, the dark spaces, the forgotten realms where you belonged before you took innocent forms. By our will, our knowledge, our recognition of your true nature," Samuel continued, "we strengthen the barriers between our world and yours. With copper and blood and personal sacrifice," Dr. Abernathy added, "we renew the binding that holds you separate from the light, from human form, from the world of substance and shadow." The door burst open. The four creatures stood in the threshold, their borrowed forms now barely maintaining human appearance. Their shadows had become massive, filling the hallway behind them like a writhing dark tide. "Too late," they hissed in unison. "The binding breaks. We rise, we—" The wooden box pulsed with blue-white light, copper lines glowing like molten metal. The creatures screamed, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the building's foundation. The light intensified, spreading along the floor to connect with the handprints in the stone. The circle of symbols around the prints ignited with the same energy, creating a glowing barrier that pushed against the encroaching shadows. "It's working," Eleanor whispered, maintaining her grip on her colleague's hands despite the almost electrical current flowing through their joined circle. The creatures thrashed against an invisible force, their borrowed forms stretching and contorting as they fought against the strengthened binding. Their shadows began to detach, pulling back toward the wooden box like smoke drawn into a vacuum. With a final, earth-shaking howl that seemed to contain centuries of rage and hunger, the creatures collapsed into themselves. Their physical forms dissolved into shadow, the darkness rushing past the researchers to be absorbed into the glowing box. The blue-white light flared blindingly bright, then faded to a steady, subtle glow. The copper wire and pendant had fused into a solid band around the box, which now appeared new and tightly sealed. In the sudden silence, Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. Did we actually just perform a binding ritual against ancient shadow entities?" Samuel leaned against the wall, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. "As a lifelong skeptic, I'm having a cognitive crisis right now, Doctor." Abernathy examined the reinforced box with professional interest. "The original binding wasn't failing by accident," she observed. "Our restoration of the photograph gave them energy, attention. Historical research as supernatural catalyst. There's a dissertation topic I never considered." As they made their way back upstairs, the building seemed transformed. Lights had returned to the lobby, and they could hear normal sounds of urban life outside: traffic, distant sirens, the storm receding. In the courtyard, the ancient oak stood peaceful and still, its branches no longer reaching like grasping hands. The four small handprints carved into its trunk, once so clear to Eleanor, had faded to barely discernible marks in the bark. "What do we tell people?" Samuel asked as they stood in the empty courtyard. "How do we explain any of this?" Eleanor thought of the missing daguerreotype, the changed digital files, the security footage. "We don't," she said finally. "No one would believe us without evidence, and I suspect we'll find our evidence has evolved." "The historical record has a way of protecting itself," Dr. Abernathy agreed. "Extraordinary events get rationalized, documentation disappears or changes, witnesses question their own memories. So we just go back to our normal academic lives." Samuel sounded disappointed. Eleanor looked up at the building where four shadow entities had been bound once more to the deep places. "Not exactly the same," she said. "We know something now, about history, about reality, about the stories dismissed as superstition." "Knowledge brings responsibility," Dr. Abernathy said quietly. "There will be other photographs, other anomalies, other bindings failing across New England. Old magic weakens over time, and old entities are patient. As they walked away from 47 Acorn Street, Eleanor felt a weight of understanding that would change her work forever. History wasn't just a record of human events. It was a living, breathing thing, with depths and shadows that occasionally reached forward through time, touching those who paid attention. Behind them, in the darkened window of Unit 4C, 4 small handprints briefly appeared on the glass, then faded away as the researchers turned the corner, leaving Acorn Street behind. 1 year later, Eleanor stood at the podium in Harvard's Thompson Hall, the projector displaying a conventional historical slide about Victorian photography techniques. Her lecture series on photographic anomalies in historical documentation had become unexpectedly popular, drawing students from multiple departments. Chemical imperfections, exposure errors, and deterioration over time can all create visual artifacts that appear supernatural to modern viewers, she explained, clicking to the next slide, a collection of spirit photography from the 1870s. What she didn't mention was her private collection of authenticated photographs showing genuine anomalies, images catalogued in a secure database she maintained with Samuel and Dr. Abernathy. In the year since the Pembroke incident, they had identified 17 additional cases of shadow irregularities in historical photographs across New England. After the lecture, Eleanor gathered her materials as students filed out. A young woman lingered, approaching only when the room had emptied. "Dr. Winters, I'm Catherine Wilson." The student offered a tentative smile. "I'm doing my thesis on architectural preservation of colonial-era foundations. Dr. Abernathy suggested I speak with you." Eleanor studied the young woman carefully. "Vivian mentioned you were researching the Wampanoag symbolism in early Boston stonework." Catherine nodded. "I've been documenting recurring patterns in foundations throughout Beacon Hill and North End. Some symbols appear consistently at specific intervals, almost like a protective network." Eleanor finished. "Yes, I'm familiar with the pattern." They walked together across Harvard Yard, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. The student shared her preliminary findings. Dozens of buildings in Boston's oldest neighborhoods contained foundation stones with identical symbols, many recently uncovered during renovation projects. "The fascinating thing is how they align geographically," Catherine explained, showing Eleanor a map on her tablet. "When I plot each location, they form a geometric pattern centered on Boston Common." Eleanor recognized the implications immediately. The Common was Boston's oldest public park, established in 1634. Before European settlement, it had been a significant meeting ground for indigenous peoples. "I'd like to show you something," Eleanor said, making a decision. "But first, I need to know, why are you really interested in these symbols?" Catherine hesitated, then spoke quietly. "When I was 12, my family renovated our basement in Marblehead. We found symbols carved into the foundation stones. That night I saw—" She paused. "You'll think I'm crazy. Try me," Eleanor said gently. "Shadows that moved by themselves, shaped like people, but wrong somehow. My parents didn't believe me, but our contractor, an elderly man with Wampanoag ancestry, took one look at those stones and insisted on reinforcing them with copper fixtures. The shadows never returned." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "Come with me. There are some people you should meet." The Historical Society's conservation lab had been rebuilt after the environmental systems failure the previous year. In a secure room accessible only by keycard, Samuel was examining a newly acquired daguerreotype under specialized lighting. He looked up as Eleanor entered with Catherine. "Is this our new recruit? Catherine Wilson. Meet Dr. Samuel Mitchell." Eleanor introduced them. "Samuel, Catherine has been mapping the protective network." Understanding passed between them. Samuel extended his hand. "Welcome to what we informally call the Shadow Project." Dr. Abernathy joined them shortly, bringing coffee and a thick folder of documents. "I've been reviewing the journals of Thaddeus Gray's contemporaries," she reported. 3 other photographers in 1850s New England documented similar shadow anomalies. Each was dismissed as technical error, or in one case, insanity. Eleanor opened a secure cabinet and removed a wooden box, not the original from Acorn Street, which remained sealed in its wall, but a replica they had created for research purposes. Inside were copper rubbings of the symbols from various foundation stones across Boston, arranged in their geographic pattern. "We believe Boston was built on a system of bindings," she explained to Catherine. "The early settlers, guided by Wampanoag knowledge, created a network of containment points to separate this world from something else. The deep places," Catherine whispered, recognition in her eyes. "Exactly." Eleanor laid out the map, showing where they had already reinforced weakened bindings throughout the city. These locations correspond to reported hauntings, unexplained events, and historical tragedies. We're systematically documenting and strengthening the network before more incidents occur. Samuel brought up a digital file on his computer, a carefully restored version of the Pembroke photograph, showing the family as they had originally appeared, shadows properly aligned. They had recreated it from written descriptions and similar period photographs, deliberately avoiding perfect accuracy. "We learned that attention strengthens them," he explained to Catherine. "Recognizing their true nature gives them power, so we create normalized versions of anomalous photographs for public archives while securing the originals. It's a balancing act," Dr. Abernathy added. "We need to understand these phenomena to protect against them, but investigation itself can weaken the barriers." Catherine studied the map intently. "There's a pattern missing here," she said, pointing to an unmarked area near the harbor. "Based on the geometric progression, there should be a binding point at this location." Eleanor exchanged glances with her colleagues. The area Catherine indicated was the site of a recent luxury condominium development, built on land that had once housed a colonial-era church. "Construction begins next week on the final phase," Samuel noted. "They're excavating for a deeper foundation." "Then we have work to do," Eleanor said, reaching for her coat. As the 4 researchers prepared to leave, Eleanor glanced at the recreated Pembroke photograph on Samuel's screen. For just a moment, so briefly she might have imagined it, the children's shadows flickered, stretching toward her before settling back into their normal positions. She turned away quickly. Some things were better not observed too closely, not given the power of attention. The entities in the deep places were ancient and patient, and the binding network that kept them contained required constant vigilance. Outside, the October sun cast long shadows across Harvard Yard as students hurried to classes, unaware of the older, deeper history beneath their feet. Eleanor watched Catherine animatedly discussing foundation techniques with Dr. Abernathy, the young woman's enthusiasm reminding her of herself a year ago, before she learned what shadows could do when no one was watching. The knowledge was a burden, but also a responsibility. As long as there were curious, careful researchers, willing to maintain the boundaries between worlds, the shadows would remain where they belonged, in the deep places, remembered only in distorted photographs and whispered stories that most people dismissed as mere superstition. Eleanor knew better now, and as she led her small team toward the harbor, she kept her own shadow close, never letting it stretch too far behind her.